PodQuest. Gonna ramble on about movies and books and television and film festivals and directors and all this other stuff that I really know nothing about because they made this really long list of things that they want to talk about and I can't even read through all of them, but it's gonna be great. Okay, start the show.
Hello and welcome to the Daily Planet Podcast, your daily dose of all things movies, TV, books, and anything else we feel like talking about. My name is Scott Daly, editor-in-chief of DailyPlanetFilms.com, and I'm joined as always by my co-host and co-editor, Matt Freeman. Matt, how you doing today?
Been pretty good, Scott. Having a pretty nice week. It's starting to get cold around here. I think today we are going to be talking about Bond and what happened, James Bond. And I think you and I were disagreeing about who the better Bond was and specifically what the best Bond movie was. And things got a little heated, as they tend to. So we decided to move it to the podcast. So that's what we're talking about today. What's going on in the world today, Scott?
I am very excited for this conversation. To talk about Bond, we brought our own British person. And by that I mean person that lives in the United Kingdom, not is actually British. Michael Grubb. Michael, welcome back to the podcast.
Hashtag not my Bond. Thank you for inviting me to the podcast.
Michael, you're not in the United Kingdom right now. You're in America.
I'm actually in the studio practically, within some amount of accuracy.
We flew Michael over just for this podcast.
Yeah, this is very important. Thank you for making the flight. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Well, anything to help out the cause and to talk about how Bond is ruining America.
Just America, not the United Kingdom?
It was already too far gone.
Oh, okay. Well, thanks. Thanks, Michael. Glad you're here. Before we get into our Bond discussion, though, we got some news items to cover, as always. The first thing I wanted to talk about is something I'm very excited about right now as we're recording, and also if you're listening to this tomorrow, being Wednesday or Thursday, the 11th or 12th of November, Shia LaBeouf is sitting in a theater in New York City watching all his films in reverse chronological order. The admission to this theater is free right now. You can walk in and watch the movies with him. He's not speaking to anyone. He's sitting there the entire time for 3 days straight. They have a camera on his face, streaming just him watching the movies. This is the most amazing thing I've ever seen.
I feel like I empathize a lot with Shia LaBeouf's desperate search for purpose. I feel like I'm right there with him as he tries to find meaning in his life.
It's just like it's an art project. He's doing it with these two artists that he did a different art project with. That I'm trying to remember what it was. It was literally him sitting in a chair with a paper bag, and you could
saying like I'm not famous anymore or something like that.
It's amazing. It's the coolest thing I've ever seen.
I can never tell if LaBeouf is sincerely an artist or just like aping the things that artists do.
It doesn't matter about authorial intent, I don't think. He is an artist, regardless of how he sees what he's doing. So many of the things he does is just so interesting. And he didn't write actual Cannibal Shia LaBeouf, but he did endorse it with a little cameo at the end.
Yeah, the fact that, and for those of you that don't know, there's a whole song that was created talking about battling a cannibal Shia LaBeouf. We'll link it in the show notes. It's hilarious. We will also link the stream of him watching himself, which is also hilarious. I'm watching it right now. He just ate some popcorn. It's very exciting. But it's absurd. He's watching himself reverse age for 3 days straight.
Well, Scott,
his whole life is literally passing before his eyes right now.
Benjamin Button style.
Going to need you to give us a play-by-play, as we're talking during this podcast. You're just going to need to interject and say what he's doing.
That I can do.
Okay.
Apparently, during the movie Fury, he was laughing a lot.
Okay.
At one point, he was crying, but I missed the crying scene.
That's not a funny movie, so...
Yeah, I'm not sure.
It's kind of like a poor man saving Private Ryan.
Yeah.
By poor man, I mean a man who is poor at making films.
Yeah. A man who uses tracer fire for every possible kind of ammunition.
It was really important that they defended that little crossroads with their one tank.
Yeah.
For some reason, I don't even remember why.
Yeah, that was a really unpleasant depiction of World War II. I mean, I don't enjoy seeing that. I like a nice, clean version of World War II that I can root for.
Yeah,
being sarcastic, obviously.
I wasn't picking up on that, and I was trying to figure out what was going on. I liked Fury. It wasn't great, but Shia LaBeouf was great in it because he removed a tooth for the role, and
that really made all the difference.
It did. I mean, his character wouldn't have been believable if he had that tooth in.
I didn't even notice he had a tooth missing. I wonder how devastated he would feel if he heard me say that.
I'm sure he wouldn't care. Because I read this article about him sitting in the theater, and after the first movie of the marathon ended, someone like sitting right behind him just said that was a shitty movie. Like acting like he's not there. And then everyone was just talking about him as if he's not sitting there right in front of you.
It's all part of the art assignment.
I'm sure it is.
He cares a lot. I think.
I'm sure. I think
that's why he's the way he is.
But I don't know.
Which is not to his detriment.
I love him. He's amazing.
I think he's good too.
And he's not a bad actor either. I think he's gotten a bad rap because.
No, I think he's a good actor. I mean, he says the no thing a lot in those movies, but that's actually just like a believable thing that someone would say.
Yeah. So I'm gonna link that. Everyone should watch it. I will have it up during the whole time. He just blinked a couple times, and a bit ago he yawned. So just there's yawning. He's probably a little tired. I don't know if he's gonna like sleep or. I mean, he's eating popcorn. But is he gonna eat other food? This is fascinating to me.
I'm gonna have to ask you to move on.
This is just a whole podcast of me just commenting on what Shia LaBeouf's doing right now.
We should just live cast the cast of Shia LaBeouf.
All right, so moving on real quick, I wanted to recommend something real quick. There's a new show on Netflix called Master of None. It's a comedy show by Aziz Ansari. It is hilarious. I don't know if either of you have seen Louis, the Louis C.K. show.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that, and it's a little like surreal, like just random events. It's like the show doesn't really have any kind of unifying thing behind it, but it's hilarious. It's so funny. I think like it's quietly being the best thing Netflix has originally produced. Like,
okay,
it's really good.
Yeah,
cool.
I like Aziz Ansari, although he kind of has. I feel like he has his one character that he does.
Yeah, this is him. He plays that character a little bit here, but it's also him very naturalistic. He's a lot of the times he's just himself, and I know which character you're talking about, but he's not doing that the whole time.
Yeah, no, that sounds good.
I'll check it out.
Matt, what about you? You got anything to talk about?
Well, so this new movie. Just kidding, it's not new. I saw The Last Action Hero last night.
That would be the Arnold Schwarzenegger one, right? The
Arnold Schwarzenegger movie from like 1995 or something. Can't be bothered to look up the date. But it's funny because I hadn't seen it since it was in theaters, and so I just completely forgotten about it. And it's quite hilarious because I just love Arnold when he's being comedic and also being sort of self-deprecating. And there's just all these parts that I sort of couldn't believe were in a movie at that period in time because they're so meta and self-aware. And it's like, hey, we're still doing action movies that are basically just like this. And this movie that long ago was sort of a takedown of the whole genre, and still relevant actually, in the sense that like at one point Arnold Schwarzenegger playing Arnold Schwarzenegger is being interviewed, and he's like, yeah, this movie we did much better. We only killed 64 people. Last movie we killed 128 people. And it's like, yeah, people are still talking about that kind of stuff. So anyway, that was
one of the big things that I remember about that movie is the one creepy raincoat character and how like dark that turn of the movie takes when he kills Arnold's character's kid or something.
Yeah.
Like that felt like it belonged in a totally different movie.
Yeah, so this is super crucial to discuss. Now, so basically, I think they just did that because the kid who's sort of the protagonist, his dad was dead, so they gave Arnold's character a dead son to have some, overlap between them.
Gotcha.
That was a lot of thought for a Arnold Schwarzenegger movie.
Yeah, it's surprisingly. Oh yes. Also, the other thing about it is the main villain is Charles Dance.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that actually makes the whole movie because he's doing the scenery chewing thing, so it's super entertaining to watch him be a really over the top villain. And then also Ian McKellen is briefly in the movie as Death.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah, well, I certainly. In fact, I didn't even recognize that it was Charles Dance. My wife was like, "Is that Lord Tywin?" After about 15 minutes, and I was like, "No, he's too young."
Charles Dance is awesome. There's this British comedy show every year that they do around Christmas, and they'll have him do a segment of it where he reads some modern celebrities like biography using really modern Valley Girlish language in his Shakespearean-y Charles Dance voice.
Awesome.
And it's pretty golden comedy situation.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah. I gotta find that link.
All right, cool. So Last Action Hero.
Yeah.
Probably no one's going to watch that as well, but...
That's fine.
A little from the archives. Michael, do you have anything you wanted to recommend?
I was going to recommend The Lobster, which is a sort of independent movie with Colin Farrell and Rachel Weisz.
Can you give a quick synopsis of it that doesn't really spoil anything? Is that possible?
Yeah, it's kind of like a nonsense movie done really well, but the premise is in this kind of fictional future. Everyone has to be paired with like a mate. Like it doesn't matter if it's like a heterosexual, homosexual relationship or whatever, but you have to be paired with someone. And if you don't, then you have to go to this hotel where you kind of like have to meet someone. And if you don't after 30 days, then you get turned into an animal of your choice. And so kind of like throughout the movie, there's like these random animals going by in the background, which are people that got turned into animals. But there's also like this group of people who kind of rebel from that in the wild, who are very, very strange as well. But the whole movie is just sort of this great, awkward, random tone. I don't want to say random because everything makes a lot of sense together. It's not just like it's not like the movie Airplane or anything with Leslie Nielsen random stupidness, but it's like smart absurdness. And I recommend it a lot. Most comedies I don't really think of as also being good films. Like The Hangover and stuff is pretty funny, kind of like scene by scene, but I wouldn't really consider it like a well done film. But this was like a really well done film.
Yeah, this is one that I really wanted to see at Fantastic Fest, but it only played during the first part, so I didn't get to see it. I hope it comes out here soon. It annoys me that you get movies over there faster than we do.
Yeah, the UK is kind of like the new hotness in terms of releasing movies. I don't know when that happened.
Well, I get like the Bond movie coming out there early, but the other ones, that's annoying.
I guess Colin Farrell is sort of, English or something.
Yeah, I wonder where it was filmed. I mean, does it take place in America-esque or something?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it takes place in... Well, I don't know. Now that you mention it, I can't really remember. Colin Farrell is obviously not American.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, neither is Rachel Weisz, unless she's playing one.
I feel like they were playing Americans, but I don't remember.
Okay. Well, I hope I get to see that. Hopefully it'll be out here in Dallas. I'll do some research before we post this and see if I can find links to when and where that's going to be.
There was another great comedy movie I saw this year. It was like Argentinian. It was called like Six Wild Tales or something like that. Scott will look that up and add it in the description later. But that was another movie that was like a comedy, but also a really good movie. So I've seen a couple examples of that now.
You need to watch some more indie comedies because, I mean, I think you're right. A lot of the mainstream comedies are funny, but would you call it good? But a lot of these indie comedies are funny and have a lot of heart behind them too.
Yeah, but the thing, I've watched a lot of indie movies over the last year, and the thing that I feel like usually makes them indie movies is that they're always incomplete. Like most indie movies I see have a really good idea or do like one thing really well, like set up a good tone, but then like they don't ever come together. And these two comedies really did.
There's a movie I want you to see called Men and Chicken. I talked about it in my Fantastic Fest recap. It's a foreign film. It has, interestingly enough, it has Mads Mikkelsen in it, the villain in one of the movies we're going to be talking about today. But it's funny and it has a lot of heart. It's really good.
Cool.
All right. So I think that's all we had as far as news and recommends and stuff. So let's get into the meat of it. Let's talk about James Bond. Before we get started, I'm going to say one thing that will kind of show my opinion on the whole thing. I think the James Bond franchise is stupid. I don't think he's a very interesting character. I don't think any of them are really super good movies. And I think he's not a really relevant character anymore. He's like a leftover from a age of, the male power fantasy type.
Would you say
thing.
he's a misogynist dinosaur, a relic of the Cold War?
Yes, I would. I would say that exactly.
Didn't M call him that?
She called him exactly that. In GoldenEye.
Yeah.
That's a really great segue.
GoldenEye was pretty self-aware, it turns out.
So basically what we're going to do here, and I think there's going to be a lot of big Bond fans out there that are going to be mad that we're not going to really talk about any of the old movies, but basically when Matt and I started talking, like he mentioned, we were having a disagreement on which was the best Bond movie. I think, Matt, you actually said, the problem with this is we're going to think it's the same movie, and then we said completely different movies.
Yeah.
So Matt really likes GoldenEye. My favorite Bond movie is Casino Royale because it's the least Bond movie, and as I said, I don't really like the character or the franchise. And Michael, you weren't in this conversation, so you get to just give your opinion on both of them.
Well, I mean, I would probably go with GoldenEye, but for like one very specific reason, which we can bring up when we talk about GoldenEye. But like you, I'll just go with some of the previous Bonds as a collective, because I feel like the modern Bonds have forgotten like the only appealing thing about Bond, which was like the car chases and the gadgets. And especially the Daniel Craig Bond has like decided that he's above that. Like they've gone out of their way to make there be no interesting gadgets in the modern Bonds, and it's like you've forgotten everything that makes Bond appealing.
But I like that they did that. But we'll get into that. But before we talked about those two, the reason we're doing this, of course, is because Bond 24 Spectre came out last Friday here in the States. I guess probably a couple weeks ago for you, Michael. Michael and I both saw it, and if you guys read my review that went out Monday, I didn't like it. Michael, you didn't like it, right?
No, it was terrible. Even for a Bond movie, I was pretty amazed that it even got made, actually, especially after the success of Skyfall. They just completely like abandoned all of the sort of like taking Bond seriously-ness that they were trying to go for. And the movie doesn't even make sense.
It makes zero sense. And I don't want to get into it. I don't want to spoil it here for the people that haven't seen it. Or you, Matt, who won't be able to watch it until it's on Netflix.
And probably won't even know.
Yeah, please don't. I mean, unless you're like a huge fan of Bond, I don't recommend this movie.
I was actually bored during this movie because they just completely abandoned tension. Like even when they were going to like, confront the main baddie, they just kind of casually rode a train there and then confronted him face to face without sneaking in or anything. it was so boring.
He does very little spying in this spy movie.
Yeah.
That's something I think all Bond movies get kind of boring. I think they're all like I watched Casino Royale and GoldenEye in preparation for this. Even Casino Royale, which I really like, I think was too long. They all seem too long to me. I mean, Spectre was like 2 hours and 45 minutes long. I think.
Was it?
That's too long of a movie.
It seemed too long. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, Casino Royale. I admit that I like it, but it seems like it has an extra act tacked on at the end.
Yeah.
Like they win, and then there's another 25-minute action scene.
Yeah, and it's an important one too. But I agree. It seems that movie doesn't really flow well. But I don't think any of these movies really flow well. I think it's just jumping from set piece to set piece, and doing whatever you can to get you to the next one.
I feel like GoldenEye actually came together pretty good.
I think you're wrong. So
seems like a good segue to talk about.
Yeah, let's move into GoldenEye. So I'm gonna be honest with you. I cannot believe you guys picked this movie. Or Matt, you picked this movie. I watched this movie yesterday, and there's gonna be some good things I can pick out of it, but this is a bad movie. This is like, and not only it's aged really poorly. So this movie came out in 1995, and it is chock full of every bad 90s action stereotype you can think of. The way it's shot, the terrible music that they use for some of it. I mean, like there's good music in it too. There's good iterations on the Bond theme, but the car chase at the beginning between Bond and Xenia, the music that they play during that thing is so bad. It's awful. So it's just not a timeless movie. It's aged really poorly, and it's not good.
Well, let me say a couple good things about it. Obviously, my opinion is a little bit influenced by spending a lot of time in the world of GoldenEye with the N64 game.
So I'm convinced that the reason you guys like this movie is because of the video game.
Well, okay, so the very specific reason that I picked this movie is because it's really the only movie that has like a real character in it. And by that I mean 006. He was the most interesting thing about this movie. One, he's basically the only time in the history of Bond that they have like another 00 agent. This institution is for some reason usually just 007.
Right. They always talk about the other ones, but they rarely, if ever, show them.
And they kind of imply that 006 is quite competent and a friend of Bond. And then the fact that Bond abandons him to finish the mission is a really good scene, actually. That kind of shows who, if Bond is anyone, that kind of shows who he is. And then the bitterness of 006 in hating Bond for abandoning him like that.
See, I
sense.
I think that's cool, but if you rewatch the movie, he didn't really abandon 006. He got shot in the head, and then Bond had to escape by like barely getting out of there alive. So it's not like he just left him to die. Like he saw the guy get shot in the head, and I don't know how he lived. They didn't really ever explain it. I don't know if he was already working for the bad guys at that point or what, but
there's certain things about the movie that definitely don't make sense, and I'm not gonna try to make them make sense because I think we talked about how like there's no reason why the Russian Oromov would ever trust 006, even to start with, and then there's no reason why he would decide to turn on him at the part of the movie where he does decide to turn on him. But all that said, I think what GoldenEye is... Okay, first I want to respond to something you said earlier where you said it didn't age well. I think most action movies don't age well. I can think of a few that do. I can think like some classics, some real classics. Most action movies don't, though. And at the time, I really do think this movie was sort of groundbreaking. And if you say that it's shot the same way as all the other movies, I think maybe this movie was pioneering certain things. I can't really substantiate that, but I feel like there were certain sort of moments that other things afterward tried to rip off or even parody. Like I'm thinking specifically of the time of the point when Bond is driving the Soviet tank, And then also I wanted to say that GoldenEye, what it does really well is basically whoever created it, whoever wrote the movie, obviously really loved the old movies. And what they did is they made a really faithful adaptation of Bond for that period of time, 1995. And if it has flaws, it's sort of the flaws of the time. So I think, your favorite Casino Royale, in 20 years, we're going to look back at Casino Royale and say that this movie is corny and cheesy. And it's probably going to be because of the fact that Casino Royale is sort of this retrospective adaptation of the Bond franchise for the time that it's in. There's my 20-minute speech.
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I don't know. It's impossible to predict the future, so you might be absolutely right that actually it'd only be Casino Royale is 10 years old, so it'll only be 10 years that we'll be doing that.
That's true.
I think it is interesting how different these two movies are, and I don't want to get into the comparison right away because there's a lot I want to talk about GoldenEye specifically. But these we both happen to pick movies that are the first movie of a new Bond, so they're trying to do something different. I see what they're trying to do here. I guess you really like Pierce Brosnan's Bond portrayal.
I think he's a really classic Bond. Like, I think in GoldenEye they were still trying to be Bond. They weren't trying to shirk off Bond like Casino Royale might have tried to do. Like, you still have all the classic Bond things. Like, he's still this suave guy who says one-liners and like has gadgets and car chases and stuff.
Yeah, I think Brosnan's Bond to me feels very traditional English gentleman. He's even when he fights, like he's not like he doesn't fight like a brute. He's very, classic gentlemanly. Like the gun he uses is the tiny little PP7, which I know Daniel Craig uses that too, but not nearly as frequently. And everything shot in the movie, from a distance. Even when he is fist fighting, the camera is really far away from him. It doesn't get right up into it. It's very kind of standoffish, like almost as if we don't like seeing him physically fight. We'd rather just see him shoot people. And
yeah. One thing that I was thinking about, and I'd like to get you guys' opinion on it because I think I kind of need to hash it out, is that I wanted to be Pierce Brosnan's Bond, and I never wanted to be Daniel Craig's Bond. And the reason why that's doesn't necessarily mean anything is because of the age at which I saw GoldenEye. When you're that age, you sort of are aspirationally putting yourself in the place of like every action hero that you see, and you go home and you play gunfights and you play the video game and you get a lot more into it. And then by the time by the time I got to Daniel Craig's Bond, I was kind of like jaded and too much of an adult to try to like fantasize about being a superhero.
So that's interesting. So what is it that you think appealed to you at that age about the Pierce Brosnan Bond?
That's what I'm not sure of, but I have some thoughts. Like, and the thing is, these are sort of post hoc because again, there's sort of the confounding factor of age. But like, for one, he's a lot more normal looking than like Daniel Craig in that role, especially the first one. Yeah, he's like this hulking, ripped, like blonde. It's very hard for me. Like even as a kid, I don't think I would see myself as him. I think I can see myself as Pierce Brosnan, because Pierce Brosnan is like, he's good looking, but in sort of like a normal way, like a guy you might see in a business meeting, and he doesn't have a spectacular physique. He keeps his physique pretty much covered in the suit all the time. There's like the suaveness, and
like Bond isn't supposed to be like a transporter type action hero who like brawls with people.
Yeah. I think there is the refinement of being British, and I don't really know what it is to be British because I'm American, but my American perspective on what it is to be British says that Pierce Brosnan's Bond is a lot more British.
So I'm gonna give my 2 cents on why you would want to be Brosnan's Bond. It's because I think it's easier to put yourselves in the shoes of a character that isn't really a character. He's more of a surrogate. I mean, Brosnan's Bond, and I think all the earlier Bonds, I mean, I don't think they're characters. I think they're just machines. It's a male power fantasy. It's meant for you to say, I want to be this guy. I want to be able to, throw on a suit and drive this expensive car and do all these things and get any girl I want, and that's what it is. And
you're exactly right, but I don't see the difference really with the Daniel Craig Bond. I think he's become that exact same thing.
I think he's become that over time, but Casino Royale doesn't. That's not who he is at the beginning of Casino Royale, and I think the point of those movies, I think, is to show his evolution over time. Even through the movie, it shows his evolution. Casino Royale, the first time we see Bond, he's not even wearing a suit. The first kill we see him is like brutally beating up a guy in a bathroom. The whole opening scene where Bond walks out and then shoots at the camera and the blood comes down. He's not even wearing a suit in that. It's a totally different kind of Bond.
Yeah, but I feel like there are, like, if there's anything about Bond, like, that's basically taken everything that Bond is out of Bond. Like, you're trying to make, in that case, a good secret agent movie that's not Bond, because Bond is terrible, which might be why you like it. But, like, there's so many better real like secret agent movies, like the Bourne trilogy, for instance.
But I think the brilliance of it is it visually hits all the Bond notes. I mean, even Casino Royale, like if you walk through the movie, it's structured and visually a very standard Bond film, but under it, it's got a character who we take time to show Bond dealing with having to kill people. There's a whole scene where he's forced to kill someone, and Vesper witnesses it, and there's a whole scene with the two of them like dealing with it shell-shocked in the shower, where there's nothing physical there, like there's nothing sexual with it. She's just found like having a trauma in the shower, like in fully clothed, and he just joins her in there. Like there's all these little beats and moments that they take the time to show. And I guess we're kind of jumping ahead here because we're more comparing the two movies than talking specifically about them. But I mean, it's so much more interested in who Bond is as a character, and I just find that more interesting. I mean, I think that's
well. That brings up a good point. Like, what do we want a Bond movie to be?
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to get entirely too meta about it, but ultimately, people at this point in time and over the last many years know that it's much easier to get a movie made if it's part of a franchise, and these franchises are just cash-generating machines.
Sure. And
the Bond franchise is one of the most, longest-running and notorious and reliable money-making franchises. So ultimately, it's like different people, different directors, even different like actors with different ideas, different screenwriters obviously have come in and said like, okay, this is the type of story that I'm interested in writing. I realize that I have to shoehorn this into a Bond movie, and of course all of these writers have had different attitudes about what that means. And in GoldenEye, whoever wrote it had the attitude of like, I'm going to make a really good, faithful Bond movie, but it's going to be updated for the present day. It's going to deal with the fact that we're no longer in the Cold War, etc. And then Casino Royale had a different reaction where they're saying like, I'm going to update it for the present day, but that's not really the main thing I'm going to do. The main thing I'm going to do is I'm going to humanize this character, etc. So it's almost like just a weird coincidence that these two happen to be Bond movies. Because we live in this weird planet where that is a thing.
Yeah, but that's what I want them to do. I mean, that's why going back to Spectre, I was so disappointed, because it really decided that we need to jump on top of all these tropes that have just become so cliche. I mean, like, we're living in a post like Austin Powers world, which took every single one of the Bond cliches and just like exposed it for the ridiculousness it was. I mean, you have to at least acknowledge that you're living in that world now, and you can't just keep going back to these. And maybe that's all people want. And I mean, the movies are going to keep doing good, but that's just why I'm just not interested in them.
I think it just makes it a giant paradox because, you know, like you said, they're just rehashing it because it's a known franchise and people have nostalgic memories of it and fondness or whatever. But at the same time, they also try to make it everything that it isn't, because they realize that everything that it was is now obsolete. And so it's kind of this weird paradox where it's trying to keep everything that it was while also throwing away everything that it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think the reason why a lot of these movies aren't too good is exactly that, is because they're just stuck in such a rigid structure that they have to do certain things. There's certain notes that they have to hit. And
the most recent one, I think, like you said in your review, was the perfect example of them just kind of, you know, thoughtlessly grabbing various references from earlier movies to remind you that it was Bond, but without bothering to put it together in any sort of narrative.
Yep. Yeah.
I mean, I definitely like Casino Royale. I will always take a Casino Royale over any one of the Pierce Brosnan Bonds except GoldenEye. Even considering that it threw away all the Bond tropes, because I don't care about the Bond tropes. I care about, honestly, just being entertained when it comes to a Bond movie.
Well, yeah, and that's kind of the reason why I'm going to... I've criticized the Daniel Craig movies, is because they've thrown... In order to try to make it more real and gritty, they've thrown away most of the fun James Bond things to me, like the gadgets. Mm-hmm. And they've been very purposeful about like removing gadgets from his movies, and
even making fun of them.
Sorry,
even making fun of the gadgets.
Making fun of them, and to me that's like the most interesting thing about the movies. Like, it's quite a juvenile delight, and it doesn't do anything to help the movie's narratives. But that's like the Bond thing, is that like the cars have cool gadgets and stuff.
Well, I think actually the problem with the gadgets is more of it's the gadgets seem less cool in a world when we all have gadgets now. Like, we all have these amazing gadgets that do all these things. So if you're making a modern Bond, like, how much... I mean, there are still gadgets in Casino Royale. There are still... Every single one of the Craig Bonds have gadgets still.
They have like one gadget, and it's usually like an exploding watch.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about tone, because, I mean, so in one of the Pierce Brosnan movies, he's like driving his car across the ice, and the car is invisible, and in GoldenEye, the villain's secret hideout is in a giant like Arecibo radar dish that's flooded with water for some reason. And all these things are like, they're ridiculous. They're laughable, but that's okay because they're in a movie with this tone of everything in this movie is going to be over the top. We have already introduced you to that idea over the course of the movie, so you're okay with it by the time we show you the ridiculous secret base. You're okay with it by the time we see the invisible car. But the Daniel Craig movies try to do, like, it's the same thing with Batman, where they try to bring you into this gritty, realistic world. And yeah, you would balk if they suddenly introduced a car with missiles in the headlights and, you know, and a rocket that made it take off or whatever. You would just laugh. You would laugh, and it wouldn't be laughing with the movie; it would be laughing at the movie. Yeah, so it's a tone problem. See,
both you guys have referred to Casino Royale as gritty, and I hate that word, and I think it's overused. I don't think it's a gritty, realistic movie. I think it's just a movie much more interested in telling the story of the character versus the overarching...
Like... Well, here's what I mean by that, and it's something that Matt brought up earlier, which is that, like, Daniel Craig is more of a brute. That's what I mean by gritty. Like, he you know, gets into these situations where he has to, like, punch people out and like you said, kill someone and like care about it. At least in Casino Royale, he hasn't cared about it since.
Well, how does caring about killing someone make him a brute?
Well, because the normal Bond is just like would say a one-liner. Like the Bond of old would kill someone with one shot without a second thought and then say something humorous. I think that's one of the departures of Daniel Craig that
Well, yeah, but I think
you think makes it better, and I mean it does in a lot of ways, but also it's like it's not Bond to me.
It's fair of you to demand that we choose more precise words than gritty, but I mean this is a movie where he gets tortured, fairly brutally.
yeah, but I mean I don't know. I like that. Like everything you're saying is stuff I like, and maybe you're right. Maybe the reason I like it is because it's not Bond. I think it's a twist on it. I mean, like every Bond movie, Bond gets captured and tortured, and maybe not tortured, but threatened in some way. With the slow moving laser or the stupid tiny needles in Spectre. I mean, every movie that happens. But in this Bond, he gets captured and his torture chair is not like a big fancy lab chair. It's a little tiny wooden chair with the bottom cut out, and he gets a big knot of rope to smash his balls in. I mean, it's hitting the same beats, but it's doing so in a way that's not. It's not that it's more realistic. It's just saying, these tropes are tired and we don't want to use them anymore. We want to show this is a guy who's just going to smash your freaking balls in. And that's what he's going to do. And he's not going to like monologue a long speech. He's not going to do anything else. He's going to say, tell me what I want to know. And if you don't, I'll smash your balls with the rope. And that's what he does.
I completely agree with you. It's a much more believable scene. You can buy it a lot more than the sort of elaborate laser table thing where you're just constantly like, why is he doing this? Just shoot him. Just shoot him.
But the elaborate I guess my point would be not that I love the elaborate laser table movies, but at least in those movies they've inducted you into their world,
right?
Where you're basically in this fantasy world where that's the type of thing people do. I mean, it's funny that we just talked about Last Action Hero, because in the Last Action Hero world, everyone is aware of the ridiculous tropes and think it's normal that there's like a cartoon character in the movie and whatever. And likewise, when you're watching, no one actually says one-liners after they murder someone.
Right.
But we've accepted that this is what Bond does, and that's
exactly.
But Bond in Casino Royale still says one-liners. I mean, the beginning of the movie has him, the second guy he's like talking to, and he says, "Don't worry, the second kill will be easier." And Bond shoots him and then says, "Considerably."
Yeah.
I mean, he still I mean, it's still there. Like the framework of it is all still there. It's just a twist on it, and I like it so much. It's so much more interesting to me. I mean, this Casino Royale is a movie that ends with Bond falling in love, the woman actually falling in love, not like fake Bond, I'm gonna bang everyone I see. He actually falls in love with this woman. He quits being the 00 program for her. She betrays him. She kills herself and drowns, and then he kind of transforms into this hardened asshole that we know him as.
But you say this, but that has happened in a lot of Bond movies, that he actually falls in love with a girl.
No, I mean, he's ridden into the sunset with the girl in a lot of Bond movies, but it was never. I mean, this movie, like, GoldenEye is a good comparison, because GoldenEye does what a lot of the other Bond movies do. What I thought Spectre did is the woman is completely resistant to Bond's charms until suddenly she isn't anymore. Like in GoldenEye, the minute they get off the train, all of a sudden there's like this sexual tension between him and Natalia that really wasn't there before in the rest of the movie.
Right.
Spectre does the same thing, actually also with a train, I think.
Ironically. Yeah, you're right.
But in Casino Royale, I think they take a lot of time to build up the relationship and slowly show them start to actually like each other.
And I think that's that brings up another good point. I think, you're right, and that was done a lot more believably. But this whole treating of women in the Bond movies is so offensive on many levels. And one is the fact that there's always one throwaway Bond girl who you're not supposed to really care about that much, who sleeps with him too easily, and thus is like, you know, implicitly a sinner, and thus deserves to be killed in a scene. But then the main Bond girl is considered more virtuous because she initially, you know, doesn't want to sleep with him.
Right.
But then at some point she does.
That's absolutely true. And
that's such an offensive, like, framework.
And I will say the cool thing about GoldenEye is the throwaway Bond girl, Xenia, is probably one of the most interesting characters in that story. Matt, I think you and I were talking about this yesterday, how she, like, physically matches him beat for beat, and she actually overpowers him every time they actually fight. Yeah. That whole spa scene when like they're fighting in the spa, but also like making out, and she's very like S&M and crazy. That's a crazy scene, and like the whole movie's set up like it's a Bond versus 006 kind of measuring men type of movie, but also Bond and Xenia throughout the movie have their own dick measuring contest. I mean, the first time we meet her, he's like recklessly racing her down a cliff, and like that scene means nothing to the rest of the movie. Like, I don't even think he realizes who she is at that point. I think it's just someone in a fancy car raced him, so so he decided to race back. And that, like, they're constantly sparring back and forth like that throughout the whole movie.
Yeah, it is really interesting because Bond is concerned with nothing if not the idea of masculinity, and this is a movie where Xenia, you know, outdoes him in masculinity in essentially every way for the whole movie. And it's only he only manages to kill her through like cleverness and trickery, actually.
It's like the most interesting thing I've heard about Bond, like, all night.
Yeah, it's really weird, and that's something I had never picked up on until I watched it again yesterday. It's weird, but it's cool. I mean,
but there needs to be more people, and it's cool that it was a woman in that one to kind of buck the system a little bit. But there needs to be more people in Bond movies that actually do challenge him, because most don't, and that's why it's boring.
I agree. And when the people do challenge them, the movie paints them as pests that are in the way and need to be overcome. And you know what really annoys me is GoldenEye was the first movie that had M be a woman, and that was awesome. I mean, for Bond, that was unheard of. If the book version of Bond would have never actually listened to a woman M, because the book Bond was even more misogynistic than the film Bond. But they kill her off, and they replace her in this next movie with another white dude, and it's like they took all this, and M was in it for a while, and Judi Dench was awesome as M. She was great, even in the bad movie. She was good.
It was a little weird how when Ralph Fiennes kind of, you know, retakes the role, there's like this triumphal tone of like, yes, we finally returned to how things should be.
And I like him a lot. He's a really good actor, but it's like, it's just like, I don't know. It was an opportunity that I think was blown.
It's true, but M is really such an unimportant character in the grand scheme of things. Like, especially in the last movie, he was pretty much like on the sidelines, I would say.
Yeah, but I mean, in the Judi Dench Bonds or M's was always a character that Bond really respected and looked up to.
Right. She was an interesting sort of mother figure.
Yeah,
I would say. But yeah, I mean, I think that's what Bond needs, really, to pull it out of its thing. I think it needs there to be more characters than just Bond, because there's always Bond, and then there's like the one girl who's new in every movie that you know isn't actually like going to be a long-term important person to Bond.
Yeah. To bring it back, Michael, to your point about 006, like in the previous Daniel Craig movie, there was, what's his name, played by Javier Bardem, right?
Yeah. Silva.
So Silva was sort of implied to be like a super secret agent prior to being a bad guy also.
Yeah.
Which was, borderline interesting, but then like to contrast this with Bond, like Bond, beats him and like he kills him in such a way that it's like a sarcastic, like he like throws a knife into his back and then the guy like looks around. It's almost played as like a laugh, it's like a comedic beat when he finally kills him. And contrast this with like this brutal fist fight with 006 on top of the radar antenna, and then he catches 006 by his feet, and 006 is like,
for England James.
Yeah, for England James, and then he's like, no, for me, and you're like, that's the most awesome thing in the whole world, and it's just because you had a strong villain. Like
and that movie, that like throwaway one-liner was actually like tied up the movie. It tied up their whole sort of conflict.
Yeah, that was definitely an earned moment, and the movie spent the time to make that an earned moment. And that rarely happens in these movies, so I will give it credit for that.
You're right. Very, very rarely does the bad guy actually like die in a good moment.
Yeah.
You actually almost feel bad for him, which I can genuinely say I never felt bad for any other Bond villain.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, they paint him as kind of a pathetic figure, right? Like he was raised by British people, but he's a Cossack, so he hates Britain for that. And we were talking about this yesterday, and I don't actually buy that line of thought. I think his primary motivation for everything was he was pissed off at Bond.
Yeah.
And he wanted to hurt Bond.
Jealous of Bond and mad that Bond didn't like see him as good enough. And that's really what Bond needs, I think. I think Bond would be really interesting to me if in the next one they had 00 like 1 through 7. And and there's so many ways they could take that, but like
make him not the best one.
They could make a point that like Bond, none of the others like Bond, because he's an ass and he's selfish and he's better than them, and but it's always just Bond. It's always just focused on Bond.
Well, and sometimes they do that. I mean, like with Moneypenny and M, a lot of times people don't like Bond, but it's always painted in a positive way. It's like in that like it's that playful. rebel like.
Right.
People don't like him, but he knows what he's talking about because he's better than all y'all. So
like what they need is like a 005 who's like this really optimistic, bright kid that you enjoy, and Bond like lets him die for the sake of the mission, and you kind of hate him for it.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the Moneypenny thing was so offensive to me. Like the things you were talking about with GoldenEye, which kind of pioneered like treating women with more respect in Bond movies with M and Xenia. It's all been completely backslid in the recent few movies. They had Moneypenny start as an agent, but then she realized that she wasn't cut out for it because implicitly she's a woman and she should be a secretary instead. And then
I want to make it clear that GoldenEye also had a woman who came out to give Bond an evaluation on his mental health, and Bond bangs her in order to pass his... I mean, so GoldenEye is really no... I mean, it does have... Xenia is a good character, but it suffers from all the same problems.
Let me be clear that there's no Bond movie that treats women with, as humans.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know... Can you name... I mean, this is probably a tall order, but can either of you name any action movie that you would describe as a straight up action movie that isn't horribly regressive along at least one of these axes?
So let me do some mental gymnastics here, because this actually brings up a movie I wanted to talk about, which I thought was a great spy movie that came out this year, Kingsman.
Yeah.
That movie. So it's interesting because I'm about to say this movie treated women well, but it's also a movie that ends with a princess telling the guy that if he saves the world, he can bang her in the butt. So yeah.
The movie doesn't though. Like the one female agent, the token female agent, is given like a hands-off, like fly into space and shoot something role, and she's really afraid, and the main character has to like tell her it's going to be all right.
Yeah, but she also is the one that won the competition. I mean,
but they always do that in movies, is the throwaway, like on paper the girl is better, but in the end it's always the boy who ends up having to reassure her or save her or whatever. And I think that's exactly what happened in The Kingsman.
Yeah, I mean, I see that complaint. I really do. I think that, I mean, there's narratively good reasons for why she couldn't go on the one mission and he had to. But also, they set up her arc as being a person that she really had a problem with heights. I mean, that was really the only moment in the film that she needed help, was she had a problem with height.
But yeah, you're right that she doesn't have a sexual relationship with the main character.
No, yeah.
That's not her point, and that is important.
Yeah.
And it's okay for female characters to be flawed and have weaknesses, because otherwise you're falling into the opposite trap, which is
right. Absolutely, I do agree that I wish they would have made her more involved in the conclusion instead of just being fly up really high and then shoot a missile at a thing.
I've got a good action movie that doesn't fall into that trope, I don't think, and that's Underworld, which is a comical thing to bring up. That's
a good action movie.
But the first Underworld was pretty good, I thought, as an action movie.
It was fun, and basically it is sort of the damsel in distress is the man. Yeah, that's true.
But another, sort of example of one, at least where they're not treated as sex objects, is the Bourne series. I mean, the girl is still kind of along for the ride, but I think she's more of a real character. But maybe that's not a good example. She still kind of needs to be saved the whole time.
Yeah, I think most of the Mission Impossible movies are also pretty bad.
I think,
as far as I can remember.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, definitely with spy movies, it's a very standard demands the spy, and which is why I liked that movie Spy with that came out this year. There's been a lot of spy movies this year.
Spy movies are really in right now.
But that movie Spy with Melissa McCarthy, is that her name?
Yeah,
I think so. Yeah,
that was a really good movie. It was really funny, and it came off as trying to play her as the typical fat jokes about this woman, but she's actually a super competent, super good spy. I mean, she's the best one, and the funny thing is they play that off with she's constantly butting heads with another spy who's played by Jason Statham, and he's an incompetent, terrible spy, but he thinks he's awesome, and it works so great because he looks like the guy that would be the amazing spy, and he's just terrible at it.
That sounds really great when you describe it. I didn't see it, but like you said in your review, which I read, the trailer for that movie made it seem so terrible.
Oh yeah, the trailer was terrible, but yeah, I mean, so we've talked a lot here, and there's a lot more we could say, but I think a good way to end, then Michael kind of started talking about this, is this is the 24th Bond that just came out. So the next one that comes out is the 25th. You know what's going to happen no matter what. What do you think they could do? Assuming that, I think Daniel Craig still has one more, but assuming that he's done now, what do you think they could do with the character and the franchise to move it kind of into the 21st century, for good? Or do you think that's even possible? Matt?
I don't know. I'm probably just going to have to recycle some of the stuff we've already talked about because I'm not that creative. But it would be neat to see him go up against a villain who was genuinely worthy of being, a big movie villain. Because I think there's I'm pretty much just going to limit my answer to that, actually, because they have confused giving the villain a lot of weird suits with giving the villain a strong character.
Right.
And it's like how they tried to make Anton Chigurh in the previous Bond movie have, be scary by showing that he was disfigured. It's like, no, that doesn't raise the dramatic stakes.
Right.
All that does is it just gives him it's the equivalent of the white cat. It's just an affectation. It's pretty basic screenwriting to create a villain that actually has high dramatic conflict with the hero, and they just never do that.
Even in Casino Royale, they made Le Chiffre cry blood, and it made no narrative, like it had nothing to do with anything. Like sometimes he had a bad tear duct that blood came out, and that was pointless. But it was just like we have to have our Bond villain have some kind of weird physical trait.
And I don't even have a problem with him having physical problems, or I mean, 006 had a scarred face, but the point is, you can't just have that. You have to actually have conflict.
It's not a replacement for character development.
Right.
Yep. And 006's scarred face worked thematically because
we got it from Bond, basically.
Right.
And there was two sides to him.
That's a good point.
The old Two-Face.
Yeah. So Michael, I mean, what do you think?
Well, I'll say I don't think the focus needs to be on the villain so much. I think that each movie already has a throwaway villain, which should be done well, obviously. But I think Bond needs something to care about. And I think what that thing should be is more permanent characters, fellow agents, a wife maybe. I think it would be interesting if he actually did get married, but then continued to cheat on them. Just exactly the kind of character he is, and that caused him some conflict. So, I think the problem with Bond is just that he's just like a machine of the British government, and they keep making up all of these kind of like idealistic things for him to be, but it just none of it really seems to hold on to anything. So I think Bond needs like a supporting cast, which is made up of characters through which Bond can actually become a character.
Yeah. You know what I just realized is a funny thing that I'm not saying it would be a good story decision at all, but I'm shocked they haven't done it before because it seems so obvious. Having Bond have a kid seems like such like an obvious thing that they would love to build a story around.
Yeah, that could possibly work as well as Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull.
Yeah, it'd be awful. It'd be terrible, but I'm just saying I can't believe they haven't done it. It just seems like something they would do. But
bring Shia LaBeouf in.
I think Shia LaBeouf in to bring this podcast full circle.
Yeah. Right.
And then in a few years we could watch Shia LaBeouf watch himself.
What about Shia LaBeouf as the next Bond?
Yeah.
No.
I mean, you probably meant that as a joke, but like, pick someone different.
Yeah.
Pick someone very different.
You know, it'd be weird. What if you do a woman?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And why not? Why not?
I was thinking about that.
I mean, the world would flip shit. I mean, when Idris Elba was tagged, the world flipped shit because they're like, Bond's not black.
Right.
And by the world, I mean the racist people. But I mean, I think people would lose their mind if they cast a woman, but I think it'd be good for the series. I think you could do a lot of really interesting stuff with that. And you could still make her as lecherous. Like, it could just be, it could just be reversed. Like, there's nothing about the character that you can't do with a woman.
Sure. No, you're right. Yeah. I don't know if that would necessarily make it better, but, why not?
It'd be at least interesting. It'd be different.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm not really interested in seeing the next Bond, so it would have to be something very drastically different that would make me say, "Oh, I'm excited for Bond 25 now." But I just don't see that happening. I think this formula brings them money. The last Bond movie made $1 billion. This one might not do as well, but will still make them a lot of money.
Bond lost me a long time ago. I've seen the last few just because friends and family have been like, "Oh, let's go see the new Bond movie." That's unobjectionable, right? But I've not been excited for a Bond movie in a long time.
Yep. All right. Well, great. I think that's all we had for today. Next week is part 2 of our Wool podcast. The book is due this Friday on the 13th. I say due, like nothing's going to happen if you don't finish it then. But if you could start submitting your discussion questions, topics, whatever to us by Friday, I'll set a post just like I did last time, reminding everyone, and you can post there, email, Twitter, whatever you want to do. So I'm really looking forward to that. Matt, you're already done with it, you said.
Correct.
I am not. So I've got to get on it, but I'm going to be on a plane a couple times this weekend, so I should be able to finish that up, no problem. I think we're going to have Cindy back for that one. It seems like just to pull it full circle. And,
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. So that's it. Matt, where can we find you on the internet?
I am at Twitter on at MORIDIMAMAEL.
Worst Twitter handle ever.
Well, it's it's just my general web handle, unfortunately. And I also write for DailyPlanetFilms.com.
All right, Michael, you have no internet presence, right?
I'm a theoretical contributor to DailyPlanet.com.
Yeah, I'm still waiting for my article on some of those video games you were playing.
It's it's coming.
I mean, a review of Lobster would be great. And,
I mean, it's all up here.
well, that doesn't help me at all. All right, you can find me on Twitter at ScottDaly85. It's DALY. You can find our website on Twitter at Daily Planet Films. And you can find all of us, including Michael's theoretical articles, at www.dailyplanetfilms.com. Thank you guys for listening. If you're listening on iTunes, please subscribe, review, rate, share, do all that stuff. If we get a lot of reviews, then we get more exposure, and that means a bigger audience. And that's what we're going for here. So any help you can be would be awesome. But Michael, thank you for coming.
You're welcome anytime.
And we will see you guys next week.